In winter 1855, Ho-Chunk leaders at Lawn Prairie had initiated negotiations with the U.S. government in pursuit of a change of reservation. The resulting treaty was ratified by Congress within a month. For Ho-Chunk families, the treaty trail now led south to land along the branching streams of the Blue Earth River. Upon signing the February 1855 treaty at Washington, which dissolved the Lawn Prairie Reservation and promised a new one in southern Minnesota, the delegates traveled to the Blue Earth River country to establish the boundaries of the new reservation. The river had been named for a naturally occurring blue clay, which had been sought as a paint by regional tribes for centuries. A rectangle extending over the many branching tributaries of this river was plotted out just south of the modern-day city of Mankato. Ho-Chunk families traveled en masse to the new reservation soon after. As with every removal, the journey itself was hard on the travelers' physical health. But unlike the foreboding expulsions of previous years, this one perhaps held out some hope for many Ho-Chunks. This was the only relocation on their treaty trail, which they had requested. It meant leaving the threat of warfare at Lawn Prairie behind, and entering a land which was relatively well matched to Ho-Chunk subsistence needs. Agriculture flourished on the rich soil. Some of the agricultural land was cleared by the government, but Ho-Chunk hoes broke over 200 acres of additional soil by 1859. The good soil of Blue Earth had drawn the attention of other newcomers too, before Ho-Chunk families arrived. This land had been ceded by Dakota bands in 1851. More than a dozen white homesteaders had hurried to this acreage, only to be evicted when the Ho-Chunk Reservation was established here. Residents of the new town of Mankato, just 3 miles north of the reservation border, vehemently protested that highly valuable agricultural land had been removed from the homesteading market. Upon arrival, Ho-Chunks were greeted at Blue Earth by an antagonistic Mankato area populace. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs reflected 3 years after the reservation's establishment. A great prejudice seems to exist among the white settlers in the immediate vicinity of this tribe, which prejudice is encouraged by those who desire to possess the fertile lands which they have been successful in obtaining for their reservation. Nevertheless, Ho-Chunks who had always relied strongly on agriculture settled in. Agent Fletcher wrote only months after their arrival that they had taken possession of their new and more suitable home on the Blue Earth River, with which they were well pleased, and where nearly the whole of them have quietly and contentedly settled down. If traditional crops of corn and tobacco flourished on this new land, so did a problem which had impacted Ho-Chunk families to various extents throughout the previous 3 decades: agency corruption and embezzlement of tribal resources. Chief Winnebago stated, "We do not complain of our lands, but we do complain of the treatment we have received at the hands of agents." The Blue Earth agents were stationed at modern-day St. Clair, slightly southeast of Mankato. Although the structures have been demolished, the agency house has been well recorded, with reminders of its presence still standing witness to those who once walked through its doors. At Blue Earth, Ho-Chunks were under continued pressure to adopt white agricultural practices, and to both look and live like white people. This concept was codified into the very treaty which established Blue Earth, stating that the said tribe of Indians jointly and severally obligate and bind themselves to settle down in the peaceful pursuits of life, to commence the cultivation of the soil, to educate their children, and to abstain from the use of intoxicating drinks and other vices. And the President may withhold the benefits they may be entitled to under these Articles of Agreement and Convention, or under Articles of former treaties, until they give evidences of amendment, and become settled, and conform to and comply with the stipulations herein provided. Ho-Chunk families faced a consequential crossroads in light of these treaty stipulations. A portion of tribal members chose to accommodate the demands to modify their lifestyle. Agency officials ran with these evidences of cooperation. But whether individual families chose to face the future with a stance of resistance or change, what was perhaps recognized by all was the shortness of supplies needed to support their subsistence. Traditionally, cash resources had been procured through the fur trade, but this was no longer readily accomplished on a small reservation. The people were heavily dependent upon annuity provisions to fill the gap, and Indian agents were reported to be embezzling substantial provisions year by year. Ho-Chunk agent Charles H. Mix assembled a delegation to enter once more into the treaty process, to implement a solution which would provide cash for the tribe and equally benefit eager Mankato settlers with a taste of the Ho-Chunk reservation land. A treaty was drawn up in Washington, which would allot reservation lands to individual Ho-Chunk families, and sell off remaining property to settlers as a means of raising funds. Ho-Chunk delegate Baptiste Lassalliere, who spoke for the delegation in the closing days of the negotiations, remarked, "You want us, Father, to act like white men, and we want to tell you that it requires a great deal of money to do so. We are very poor, as we have told you. Our annuities are rapidly running out. We need money, and will need more next year than this." The Treaty of 1859 opened thousands of acres to white settlement. But there was also a deeper government aim within this new concept of allotting land to individual Ho-Chunks. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs had put it this way the year prior. The suggestions of the agent in regard to the settlement of lands on each head of a family, in my opinion, should be carried out, and a disposition made of the surplus lands. Farms then opened will give them a stability and fixed locality that must be eventually successful in destroying their tribal organization, individualizing and socializing them, so as to make them identical in habits and customs with their white neighbors. Back in Minnesota, it was noted that at least one tribal leader, who would have voiced strong opposition to these treaty arrangements, had not been invited as a delegate to the council. Chief Winnebago observed, "The agent did not call me, though head chief. But when I heard of it, I went in, and he told me I was not wanted, for me to take care of the women and children. I asked the agent what he had been doing. Was he trying to send certain men of his own as chiefs to Washington to sell our land?" Settlers soon began taking possession of Ho-Chunk's surplus land, which turned out to consist of a full half of the reservation. However, the monetary benefit promised to the Ho-Chunk nation did not materialize because the treaty remained unratified in Congress until the spring of 1861. By this time, a catastrophic regional event loomed on the horizon, which would abruptly shatter Ho-Chunk hopes at Blue Earth. The Dakota War of 1862. Around August 14th, 1862, a Dakota chief arrived at the village of Ho-Chunk Chief Little Decorah. He requested that Decorah's band join him in an alliance against the whites. Decorah put him off with the answer that he would meet with his fellow elders. After the unnamed Dakota leader left, Decorah pleaded with his people not to become involved in such a prospect. Days later, on August 18th, 1862, the Lower Sioux Agency, located about 60 miles from the Blue Earth Reservation, was attacked by Dakota warriors under Chief Little Crow, who held as his motivation years of broken government promises and resulting hardship. Ho-Chunk families recoiled in fear. Their agent wrote, in consequence of a threat that the Sioux would exterminate the Winnebago unless they joined them in a raid against the white people, the Winnebago have lived in fear of an attack from the Sioux, and have almost daily implored me for protection. While the majority of Ho-Chunks refused to become involved in the war, Little Decorah later recalled that 13 other Ho-Chunks, including Chief Little Priest, had chosen to join Dakota warriors in the raids. Some of them were reportedly at the fore in the Lower Sioux Agency attack. Battles ensued, which etched places such as New Ulm, Birch Coulee, and Fort Ridgely on the map of history. By the end of September, the short, bloody conflict was over. Just as in the wake of the Black Hawk War, Ho-Chunks as a whole again paid the price for a minority's involvement in the present conflict. The consequences were dire. By September, Mankato papers lobbied for the immediate removal of the Winnebagos from their reservation in this county beyond the borders of the state. Even the formality and notice offered by a treaty was dispensed with, as U.S. officials called a special session of Congress in February 1863 and passed legislation for the wholesale expulsion of the Ho-Chunk Nation out of Minnesota. Ho-Chunk families were notified of the government's mandate on April 25, 1863. Government officials could not even specify the place to which they would be sent. The location was not settled upon for another month. Ho-Chunks were to give themselves up at Mankato in early May. About 1,000 complied at the determined time, and were placed on steamboats to descend the Minnesota River to Fort Snelling. Winnebago, the aged Wakan Decorah, and several hundred others sought to resist and did not respond to the summons. Soldiers were dispatched, and Winnebago's group, too, was rounded up within weeks. He and his fellow chiefs, including Wakan, were photographed at Fort Snelling that May. A photograph cannot convey the depth of anxiety, frustration, and despair behind the faces. Steamboats and trains were utilized in this expulsion effort, but the death toll was no less gruesome. More than 1 in every 4 people who began the trek died on the forced journey, victims of neglect, disease, and abuse by a government which had assumed a vengeful posture against their human cargo, most of whom had nothing to do with the war, but were associated with it merely by their native blood. These modes of conveyance brought the groups to Crow Creek, a tributary to the Missouri River in present-day South Dakota. Surviving Ho-Chunks arrived at the site between June 10th and June 24th, 1863, less than 2 months since the orders came for their expulsion. What they found upon their arrival was shocking and terrifying. The hastily established Crow Creek Reservation was a piece of land slightly larger than Blue Earth, placed on a desolate bend in the Missouri River. The reservation bordered that which had been established for the Dakotas, who were exiled along with them. The two tribes' boundaries met at modern-day Fort Thompson, South Dakota, named for a stockade fort which was thrown up at the juncture point between the Ho-Chunk land and adjacent reserve for Dakota deportees. Ho-Chunks were informed that anyone seeking to leave the reservation would be fired upon. It took such threats to keep human beings at this place. The rolling Missouri River bluffs supported little agriculture, even less in the drought year of 1863, and Ho-Chunk families feared straying from the Fort Thompson agency area in case of reprisals by their neighboring Dakotas. To this day, the region is one of the most impoverished in the nation. Prior to Ho-Chunk's arrival, the official assigned to establish their reservation complained that already by June, the dry weather has left the ground so hard that it is difficult to make a plow strong enough to break it. A foreign landscape lacking game offered little means of survival, without even timberland for firewood, apart from poor burning cottonwood. With the haste of the expulsion, there were no facilities or shelter beyond a stockade, which they were not permitted to enter. Only scarce food and poor water were available. Direct Ho-Chunk voices are sparse in the historical record at this place. Dakotas, however, spoke of the rotten rations served in cottonwood log troughs and horrific abuse by Fort Thompson soldiers. Deaths mounted daily. An eyewitness said that a common remark had developed among Ho-Chunks that it would be a mercy for the government to kill them all at once and have it done with. Death attended life at Crow Creek. A tribute to the lives lost at Crow Creek stands just south of present-day Fort Thompson, South Dakota. The memorial perches atop the Big Bend Dam, the construction of which submerged the troubled river bottoms of Crow Creek Reservation beneath the Missouri. Ho-Chunks prepared to take a bold risk to escape this hell on earth in a last-ditch effort to preserve the lives of their families. The trail continues in Episode 6.